A performance that reminded everyone, if you still needed your memory jogging, that this Arsenal team have gone nowhere. And while we as Arsenal fans hope that this result can catalyse some momentum into our season, today's analysis is going to focus on how we dismantled Nottingham Forest, focusing on some really interesting roles adopted by the Arsenal players and why much better times are ahead. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once more. And let's begin with a first half template to get behind, I think, and a template that saw us wrestle so much early control. This was the typical shape that we found ourselves in, a lopsided kind of 3-2 build-up, with Timber dropping into right centre-back, Jorginho positioned purposefully inside the opposition block, behind that front line of Nottingham Forest 4-2-4 mid-block, that familiar mid-block shape that we're coming up against week in, week out almost, and Calafiori in this kind of hybrid role, offset slightly deeper and wider, and this setup also allowed room for those deep swings from Martin Odegaard, with Mikel Merino, the other interior, playing as that higher 8 in our left centre mid role, a left centre mid role that feels designed for Mikel Merino. Now, what was the intention behind this setup? It was centred around making that Forest front line essentially redundant in their pressing, and obviously it helps when you have such a ridiculously technical group of players like we did against Forest on the pitch. Here, Calafiori draws wider in his pivot duties, meaning that Yates, who has moved into the front two alongside our knee, has no passing lane to block essentially into the midfield, again making him redundant. And what these Calafiori movements also do is stretch that Forest press really wide, and you can see how at times our middle third shape becomes this sort of 4-1 almost, which means Elanga cannot pressurise our wide centre-backs on the ball, which is what the 4-2-4 mid-block press is built around, those pressing triggers onto the wide centre-backs. Because Calafiori is keeping Anthony Elanga honest, and this has been one of our go-to methods actually this season for reducing the strengths of these type of opposition blocks. Just normally it has been one of our pivots dropping in between the centre-backs in the back line. Creating that extra passing lane is all well and good, however, we combine this by allowing one of our interiors, mostly Martin Odegaard, to swing into these deeper, wider zones, which in turn makes the Nottingham Forest pivot behind their front line have to cover these vast swathes of ground. And you can see here how we actually do this on both sides really well in this case, with Odegaard and Calafiori, and that links again to the positioning of Jorginho inside the block too, which becomes an option for Martin Odegaard to access, or in this case Jurrien Timber, who knocks it to the Italian, with Odegaard helping create that space for Timber to punch a pass through to Jorginho, who switches it all the way to Leandro Trossard. A sign, I think, of the tempo and intent that we played with on the ball against Forest, which I was extremely fond of. Now, we know that Mikel Merino is predominantly the higher of our number 8s, but what was really nice to see was the modularity of who dropped deeper, which meant our progression wasn't just bound to the right-hand side. With Calafiori in that hybrid pivot role, it gave the space for Merino to easily drop into the pivot, pushing Calafiori here back out to left back, where he becomes that free man. And remember last video talking about the importance of having these big pushes from fullback for Arsenal. Elanga here, as a result, is kept in no man's land. Calafiori can carry us up the pitch. And that relationship between Calafiori and the left centre mid, Mikel Merino, looked to start to tick quite nicely, I thought, against Forest. Here, Calafiori receives outside the block, eliminating how much pressure can be applied, and it's Merino that swings wide. And this also gives Calafiori the space to inject that pace and purpose into our left-hand side play, bursting through the half space. This was actually a much more measured display, that we called for at the end of last video on Calafiori as we sort of ease him back into action. And instead he gives these moments of dynamism in more controlled bursts. Of course though, this was mirrored to arguably greater effect on our right hand side. As the ball is circulated back round in this passage of play, we rock to the right as Odegaard drops, and this is Jurrien Timber's cue, although he was more reserved in that right centre back role, to pick his moment and burst into that higher pocket, opening up the ball to Jorginho inside from Martin Odegaard, and Timber continues to move high, creating that depth, pulling Rodriguez in the Forest pivot everywhere and ensuring that Jorginho can just roll it into Bukayo Saka for an easy, I say easy, 1v1. But look how effortless things look when dynamics are so simple and start to click like this on the pitch. And this was the basis that gave us total domination in the first half. But what was it about our final third play that meant we cashed in on that control? This was a moment where Martin Odegaard decided to float to the left-hand side with Calafiori accepting the invitation to roam about, and these rotations momentarily with that Calafiori drive inside compacted Nottingham Forest and opened up that passing lane to Leandro Trossard. It's now Calafiori and Merino that interchange positions, leaving Calafiori in that pocket and Merino closer to the middle where he often found himself free against Forest. And you can see, can't you, how the key for Arsenal is staying dynamic even when we are within a more settled, fixed shape. This fluid rigidity I've spoken about so much, with Odegaard here being that deep connector in our triangle on the left hand side, finding Calafiori in the pocket who flicks it onto Trossard, and look at how clever Calafiori's movements are here, moving lower once again, rotating with Odegaard who sort of ghosts in on the underlap, almost making a cutback for Saka. What a move. And the same goes for Odegaard. I can show you countless examples of how he created space for others with his movement, how clever, how absurdly good he is with his pocket play specifically, and how he kept us ticking really nicely as he dropped in the build-up. And there was, I think, a great balance to Odegaard's usage yesterday, actually, with the players around him. And I also liked Martin's intention to look with his longer passes at times. Here he actually picks it up off the feet of the centre-backs and whips it into Saka after Jesus and Timber created that aforementioned depth for Saka to receive with their runs. And we've already referenced, of course, Timber's more reserved, arguably, role at right centre-back, but also how he was allowed to pick his moments in order to give that right-hand side that dynamic support. And the same goes for when he moves on the outside. We've got Odegaard kick-starting here, that triangular rotation, moving from high to low, with Timber filling Saka's hole out wide. And as we did the whole of the game, the player occupying that central pocket was relatively fluid between the likes of Moreno, Jesus and Trossard. And it's Trossard here who links it into Timber on the overlap, who finds Saka centrally with a cross. And I think it's fair to call for Saka, especially with his first goal, to be allowed to find himself in the middle more. But what I still have loved this season about our play is how conscious we have been with creating room for Saka to play into, even if it is on average a little wider than we would want. And there's still no doubt that as we force these mid-blocks back and deeper, we have the shiftiness, the associativeness, the speed of play on that right-hand side, in and out of the pockets, which Timber certainly adds to, that make our right-hand side in situations and game states like this just so productive. And in many respects, this was mirrored against Forest by the left-hand side, even if we didn't attack with the same volume. I want to move on, though, to examine how we left this slightly more disciplined build-up shape in the second half. And remember that ability to shift between approaches and improvise accordingly is what we've been focusing on a lot on this channel recently. And in the second half, things in terms of structure definitely became a lot more fluid, and with Odegaard taking a lot more deep touches with Jorginho's temperament off the pitch. We began to see a lot of these constant little adjustments, with here Merino helping out deep before we work it around to Odegaard on the sideline, with Timber moving up into that higher pocket. Jesus helps us connect through the centre here and actually stays deep alongside Thomas Partey, which gives Calafiori that license to float about in those positionless type positions. He's picked out by Saliba, bumps it onto Odegaard, and we progress it easily to Bukayo Saka. Things started revolving really nicely after Partey's goal, with here both our fullbacks actually inverted, with Partey in between the centre-backs, and look how Timber again bursts high when Odegaard receives to create that route, this time into Oleksandr Zinchenko, who had a very good cameo, I thought, after he came on as a substitute. In this image, our build-up looks so fortified, and we invite that Forest pressure with our numbers deep before Raya wraps it into Timber, who has stayed high and got himself unmarked. And once again, it is those fullbacks intelligently finding space for themselves once more that is so key to our play. And Timber here, because he's higher, he's allowed to straight away give that support to Saka, which is really nice on the outside. Jesus overloads and links, and we've got Odegaard in a really nice position here too, deeper, just linking, and he almost picks that pass to Timber on the outside, doesn't he? But to finish this analysis, it's only right we talk about Ethan Nwaneri and the effects of his substitution with Raheem Sterling. I still feel a bit reticent about releasing my video on Nwaneri, given the fact that he's still just 17, and it still feels ever so slightly wrong to add to the growing hype, but I'm sure it will reach a point where I will just end up hitting the upload button. For now though, let's take the chance to talk about Ethan's cameo. As I've said, just like Odegaard, his movements in the pockets are so clever, especially for someone so young. Here, he pulls wide and showcases now what makes him so unique. He has a motor, Ethan, that allows him to get into stride instantly. His feet sort of chopped and scythe at the ground, giving us a different type of pocket threat. Someone who can drop a shoulder, accelerate, spin and drive, getting it up to speed straight away. And his range of motion is just really impressive. This, of course, gives you more sort of central punch, opening up the pitch on the inside with that drive and that carry. And it's also why I'm excited about the potential role of Timber on that right-hand side with our current composition, because I think we still need that different bit of bite centrally, certainly. And it's something Calafiori's dynamism also helps with on the left-hand side. But that's more for another video, and probably the Nwaneri video. But we settled into more of this 4-3-3 base with Nwaneri on. But again, his goal comes from that acceleration between the lines. Sterling, of course, at right wing, helps to create that space because of how good he is bursting on the outside with his strong foot. And look, guys, I still have really high expectations for Sterling this season, because I know he is a player that can still give us so much. But we need to see more of him, more from him, more of him in terms of literal minutes. And I think although his ceiling is higher at left wing, I think it's the simplicity of his directness at times on the right wing, how scared defenders are of that burst down to the byline, and also how that opens up at times the room for that inside carry that show Sterling is a really good option for minutes behind Saka on the right too. But of course, Nwaneri here, as he gets the cutback, shows his nose for goal in the box too. So thank you so much. I really hope you've enjoyed my analysis of the game and how I think we've been building for a dominant performance like this in terms of certainly the result for a while now. And let's hope, as I said in the introduction, that this is the start of some proper momentum picked up for us, because I'll say it again, guys, we've got still such a chance this season. So stick with it. But thank you very much. As always, I'll be replying to all your comments down below. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.